And as we look out at the country in a political election year, and as the world, whether things are happening in the Middle East or in Ukraine and Russia, it is very easy for us to go, oh, all is lost. But there's this beautiful idea that, one spark of light will always eliminate darkness. It can never overwhelm it entirely. And so,
ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Eternal Optimist podcast. And I am joined today by my friend from South Africa, now living in Atlanta. And I'm going to get his name right. It's Carl Lubbe.
Oh, 10 out of 10. Well done.
Yes.
Well
Thank
done.
you.
Yes.
Thank you. Carl is known as the world-renowned curiosity coach, and he is coaching at a high level, CEOs, executives. He's in some very big groups and leading big groups of people. So we have an experienced expert, in business, coaching, consulting, running businesses. He understands these things, and we've been, chatting and keeping it light and having a good time before the recording. Man, get ready for a good conversation today with Carl. So, Carl, to kick things off here today, give us a little context. What are three? Just give us some bullet points about you to set the stage for what we're going to talk about today.
Well, Matt, first of all, thanks for having me on. Also, thanks for the eulogy. It's always so strange we come on a podcast and somebody speaks so lovely and affirming about you and the work you're doing. You're like, I'm not dead, right? We're saying that, okay, that's great. So a little bit about me and I guess my journey and where I am currently. From South Africa, immigrated to the States. The story is apparently interesting enough of our arrival in the U.S. that my mom just finished her autobiography around that whole thing. And so I have led a pretty charmed and interesting life. And then now happily married with a couple of kids, live in the States. And as you said before, I have the incredible pleasure and unfortunately the rare distinction of really loving what I get to do for a living, and am on a mission to change that for everybody that I meet. I want them to love what they're doing. And so, my company, we do executive coaching and leadership development, and we say we make happier companies because you're working too much, you're giving too much time to your profession to not enjoy it. And so, I think if you're not having fun, it's possible you might be doing something wrong. And a lot of that is about human interaction and our curiosity and inquisitive nature about each other. And so what we specifically train is how to ask better questions and stop giving simpler answers. Yeah. So we teach people how to people.
Oh my God. This is like I'm having a rush of positive emotion right now, team, simply because he just said some things that I get just super geeked out about. Yeah. Asking better questions. I thought one of the staples of my practice as well. So I think we could talk shop today. Mm-hmm. There's so many places that we could go. But let's start here. You mentioned that your mom is publishing an autobiography about the journey of immigrating here from South Africa, and I'm curious, about your experience. So how old were you, and can you just share any of the trials and tribulations of that journey, Carl?
Yeah. And so, when I came to the States, I was 8. And so mom and dad, my mom's from England. My dad was from a country that's now called Zimbabwe. They immigrated to South Africa. And then my dad, like a lot of people, gets captured by the American dream and is like, oh, I want that thing for us. And so he finds a company in Central Africa who said, hey, if you come and work for us for a year, we'll send you on a paid holiday anywhere in the world that you want to go. So all of that happens. We immigrate to Central Africa. And when, as a kid, you're thinking, go to the States. You're thinking, okay, there's New York City and Manhattan and Times Square, or maybe we'll go to California and see Hollywood, or maybe we'll go to Florida and see, Disneyland or Disney World. And we arrived in East Tennessee and went to Dollywood. That's what we did.
Awesome.
And it was awesome. It was not what we expected, but it was awesome. And it all worked out. My dad had a contact there and found a job. And so they said, yeah, we'll hire you and help you with the paperwork. And so we went back to Zaire, incredibly excited. And then the company got wind of this, that employed my dad and said, oh, you're never leaving. Like, that was not part of the deal. You're well paid. You've got a driver and a nanny for the kids and people to help you. Like, we can't replace you. It took us a long time to get you. And this is, 1989. This is
Okay.
before Monster and Indeed and LinkedIn. It's like, no, it's hard to get people, and so we're going to keep you. And at that point in Zaire, it was a dictatorship, and the guy who owned the company was connected with the dictator Mobutu Sese Seko, and was like, oh, so you can actually back this up. Like, you have the political power and leverage to make sure. So basically, at that point, my folks realized we're kind of under house arrest. And I'm,
Wow.
I'm 8 at the time, so I don't even know what's going on. And so the only other English speakers we knew were missionaries from Orlando, interestingly enough. And my dad kind of goes to them and says, like, what do I do? And they're like, well, we need to get you a plane ticket out of here. So literally these missionaries sit around like a dining room table, and they just, throw cash into the center. This is as much money as we've got. And it was enough for one plane ticket one way. And so that night, my dad, they smuggled him out of the country in the back of a cab under a blanket, flew from Zambia to JFK. And the next morning, I remember these guys showing up at the house, like, Jeep, guns, the whole bit, like, oh, you're military personnel showing up to escort dad to work. And the part that I'm still unclear about, and I don't know that Mom really even clarifies in her book, is like, what was the plan here? Like, this is Central Africa in the 80s. Like, if you take from me, I'm going to take from you. They could have put 5 bullets in me and my 2 brothers, my mom, and my grandmother, who lived with us my whole life. And nobody would have come asking any questions. There wouldn't have been any retribution or justice. And for some reason, they turned around and walked away. And over the course of the next, 8 or 12 weeks, these missionaries who, we weren't really connected. We weren't a part of their church or their thing. Like, we just become friends because they were the other English speakers in town. They raised enough money through these yard sales for 5 more plane tickets. And so we did the same thing. I remember very vividly my mom opening the window to the house, taking the keys to it, and throwing the keys in the house and just closing the window. And we got into 2 different cabs, me with my grandmother, my brothers with my mom, underneath a blanket, in the middle of the night, through the border into Zambia, and came to the States with 2 suitcases and $100.
Wow. If that's not a story just to kick us off today, wow. And you were 8 enduring and over. Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm almost speechless over here.
Well, and the thing that's lost, I think, in all of that is, I think that's where the superpower of curiosity came into play for me, because everything was interesting. Like, we arrive in JFK in October in flip-flops and, tank tops. And it's like, oh, you immediately get curious about where's the cheapest place to buy coats, because it's verging on, autumn, winter in New York. And then the whole world is interesting and new and different. I mean, we were coming from a place where, in Central Africa, your grocery stores were running out of groceries during this particular time in the world. And I arrive and, I walk into a Walmart for the first time, and I was like, what is this place? And, everybody, everywhere we went, my accent's much thinner now than it used to be. But at that point, they're like, especially when you lived in East Tennessee, they're like, I like the way you talk. And I was like, I like,
yes.
Yeah. And then I would be like, I like the way you talk. And so it was this fascinating thing for young kids to be in this new place where everything felt new and interesting and fascinating, and the people were so fascinating. So it was easy to be interested in that space and season.
Okay. Well, so to me, talking to you is like I'm a kid in a candy store, because you are the renowned curiosity coach, and you gave me an in. You said that kind of curiosity maybe started in that time frame when you immigrated over here. And can you trace for us your relationship with this value of curiosity, and kind of take it to how did it lead you into becoming, the business leader that you are today, Carl?
And again, another great question, Matt. I think what I've always been able to do is go, why are...
Carl, if I can interrupt for a second.
Yeah.
I feel like right now, since I'm talking to like the world-renowned curiosity coach, I feel like I've got to ask some good questions. So I've got my interview playbook from like 2001 and 1998. Yeah. What are your 3 best strengths?
Sure.
What are your 2 biggest weaknesses? Like old school interviewing from like the 80s.
Right.
I don't want to ask you any of those. Yeah. I want to ask you some open-ended things. Yeah. I'm not trying to stump you, but I'm genuinely curious about how do you become the curiosity coach? Because your story is a hell of a start. So
Yeah.
back to you, my friend.
Thank you, sir. It's interesting. I literally sent out a question to, about 15 of my friends and clients and partners this morning, asking the question. It was like, hey, I came up with a new one today. Was, what is something fun that you find yourself thinking about a lot lately? And the responses are really interesting, and they vary anything from, oh, I'm looking to buy a cabin, I'm looking forward to my next international trip, to I've forgotten how to think about fun. Can you help me with that? And so it's this wide spectrum. But it's this idea, I think for me, the thing that set me on this path is the world is much more fascinating than we give it credit for. And what happens when we're about 8 is we start to move from this childlike wonder and whimsy, this curiosity, this excitement about the world, to self-preservation, because it's the first time we start to notice things are not as they should be. Something's broken, something's difficult, something's hard. And then we create these protective mechanisms because that's our brain is hardwired, is for scarcity. This is why our response to scarcity is fight, flight, or freeze, biologically, neurologically speaking. And so I think what happened to me during the course of my teens and my 20s is I noticed the world was more fun when I didn't protect myself, when I wasn't, oh, I think this is what this other person is thinking about me and of me. Because what I noticed was if I was genuinely interested in somebody else, I would become interesting to them. And so if I was the person who was incredibly present and curious and inquisitive about somebody else, I moved from being the weird new kid to, oh, I really like Carl because of the way he makes me feel about me. I feel so fascinating to him that I feel comfortable in my own skin. And then we don't create those very quick, very early barriers. And this is true of a teenager. It's also true of a networking event. I was coaching a CEO about 2 years ago who's terrified of networking events. He had literally driven to them, a powerful, successful person, and would drive to the parking lot, have a panic attack, and then leave. And he called me the next morning after one of these events where he was supposed to be kind of guy on a panel, somebody there. And he was like, I was terrified of the small talk around the cocktail tables before I went onto stage. And I had to call the organizer and say, I'm sorry, I can't make it. And he said, can you help me undo that anxiety? And I said, what would it look like if you walked into the room fascinated in other people as opposed to scared about the way they'll perceive you? And this concept of it, in order to be interesting, you have to be interested. Your anxiety is all self-focused. What are they going to think of me? Am I going to look stupid? Am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to be by myself in the corner table? Am I going to feel like the middle school, high school, college version of myself that maybe wasn't popular or interesting to other people? And I was like, if we can remove that focus and you can think about who are the other people in the room, even if you don't know them, Matt, you and I have never spent any time together. And on this podcast, I will do something very uncomfortable. I will ask 10% of the questions that I want to ask because I'm fascinated by Matt. Hey, let's talk about your history as a military kid. Let's talk about your history. I want to know this and this and this. Let me ask all these questions. And obviously, this format is a little bit different. But typically, in that discipline, in that muscle, in that wiring, I walk into a conversation going, you have a fascinating story and I want to know it better. So how can I ask questions? How can I be present? And I think that is the thing that has over the last 30 years, 35 years now, taken me from the 8-year-old to the 43-year-old who's going, whether I'm with other kids on the playground or with a group of managers or executives or C-suite individuals, we're all 8 years old in the core. And I'm on a mission. I'm on a rescue mission for your inner 8-year-old.
Awesome. On a rescue mission for the inner 8-year-old. That's fantastic. I'm going to tread water for a second and ask you if there's a question you might want to ask me related to anything in my background, visual that you can see, or anything I've already shared with you. What might be a question that you're curious about?
Yeah. One of my favorite questions when something new is, if I were to meet one of your best friends, what would they say is one of their favorite things about you?
Oh, that he can laugh at himself at any time, that we genuinely have a good time doing nothing. We can create an energy and a spark from nothing, just hanging out. All right, so I think that might be some place to start.
Yeah. And
it's just the ability to create your own energy source and then help feed others just find the energy when you're around other people. That's one thing.
So the beauty of that answer is it immediately tells me 3 or 4 very intuitive things about you. One, some people struggle with that question because it feels vulnerable. Maybe they don't have deep friendships. And if I ask, hey, how would your friend describe you? If they immediately shut down and go, I don't know. What would your friend say about you? It's going, oh, there has been some negative reinforcement in the past about anything positive about you. You can quickly go to the negative, but it's difficult for you to hold or own or acknowledge the positive, great things about you as a person. Where does that come from? So it gives me kind of a roadmap into their history. Your ability to quickly answer the question lets me know there are some deep friendships. You know what your friends value and the things that you bring to the table, which means that you've done self-work. There's a higher level of self-awareness. And also the sense of whimsy that you bring to the answer goes, oh, I may take my work or my mission very seriously, but I don't take myself too seriously, which automatically lets me know, oh, this is somebody that I'd like to spend more time with. Because I think most of the problems in the world, their origin is from people who are taking themselves far too seriously and the things that they could do, serve, or solve in the world far too lazily.
And I'm sitting down on the back porch the other night, and it came to me all of a sudden, just this idea. I run inside to my wife on the couch and I say, Julie, I just figured everything out. The secret to our health and our relationship and everything in our lives. And this is it. Matt, just chill out. Don't take it so serious. Let's be playful.
Yeah.
Right. And if we can approach everything, for me, everything is kind of like a game.
Yes.
And if we can approach like a game and continually be aware of all the pieces on the board here, and maybe since there is this drive inside, maybe level up the game in the areas that are important. That to me, the journey, that's how we live with joy. And that's how we are on a journey for happiness, but we're already full of it. Full of joy, that is.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's
all that
so
just
true.
Just kind of comes up. Yeah. Well, I'm curious about you a couple things. I know that there is a guitar in your background. I know that there is a fancy bottle with a brown liquid in the back there. But, directly above your head is this box. It looks like, is it a golden frame or is it a safe? What is that black box back there directly above your head? Because that looks pretty fancy.
So this here is an old radio. So in my first professional iteration as a human, I was a professional musician. So I traveled and toured and got to do things like, meet people who fill arenas, and then got to do some of that myself. And so there's a big affinity for music and all the things that come along with it and storytelling. And then I also have a branding agency. So aesthetics are like visuals are something that I also really love and value. And so this to me was the perfect merger of both those things because it's this beautiful old radio that still works. And so it can play music and then also look beautiful on the shelf. And so I like to keep these things. And it's funny that you're pointing things out because for me, the shelf is just all of a collection of pieces of me. And so you've got above me, you've got the little Believe poster from Ted Lasso, which is to me like the perfect avatar of curiosity and whimsy and childlike adultness. And then you've got a bunch of Manchester United memorabilia on the right side because I'm a third generation supporter. I had no choice in it and am grateful and sad about that all the time.
Wow. Fantastic. Love it. What's something you mentioned? You've been around, some well-known people that fill arenas. What's a story about either opening for or being around some well-known person in arenas?
So one of the ones that pops to mind, somebody who's incredibly curious, is my brothers and I signed to a little indie country label out of Nashville, and they wanted to turn us into like the Rascal Flatts meets Kings of Leon from South Africa. It was a very weird thing they were trying to pull off. But what it did is it got us to, get co-writes with these really great artists. And then what they would do every once in a while is you kind of play speed dating where you meet larger artists. And this is where the labels are either trying to sell you to a bigger label or get you on a bigger tour. And so you do these lunch things where it's literally like your handler will kind of move you to different tables and introduce you to people. And so we're sitting down having lunch with a group called Little Big Town. And then after that, somebody moves us over and we are with a different band called, they're now called Lady A. They were Lady Antebellum at the time. And at one point, Garth Brooks gets up and sings a song in the room and you're like, oh my gosh. And Jewel walks by. And then I'm standing having a conversation with a couple of people and I feel a tap on my shoulder and they're like, hey, Carl, I know you're from South Africa. I was just telling Taylor that you're from South Africa. Would you guys like to chat? And I turn around and there's Taylor Swift and this is 2007, 2008. And so she's already, a massive country star. She hasn't, I think, made the big pop crossover, but she's already filling in arenas and being who she is. And so we just had the loveliest conversation. And she's somebody very much like you, instantly curious. I had so many questions about like songwriting and her trajectory and the way that she was doing this really fun crossover between country and pop, which is something we were trying to figure out. And I couldn't get a word in edgewise because she's like, wait, so you're from South Africa? I said, yes, ma'am. She's like, I've always wanted to go. And she had this question and this. And I mean, now we're just in it. And I cannot do anything but just answer all of these curious questions. And she was so present and so engaged and so lovely. And it was very funny because, I'd forgotten all about this encounter, because this is 2000 and like I said, 7 or 8. And so this is almost 20 years ago now. Or 15 years. And the other day, I've now got an 8-year-old daughter who loves all things Taylor Swift. And the memory came to my mind. And I was like, hey, babe, do you know, like I've spoken with Taylor. I had a conversation with her years and years ago. And her, eyes get about this big. And she's like, my dad knows Taylor. So I was like, no, baby, I don't know Taylor. Like we've talked and, she wouldn't recognize me in a crowd, I'm sure. But we had a lovely conversation and she's as great as you think she is. And she just thought that was it. And so, now it's like, I'll take the fun, brownie cool points with my daughter. And also love telling that story just because Taylor was such a lovely human.
Wow. Fantastic. You just triggered something in my mind. When I was in the 9th grade back in 1992, there was a South African golfer by the name of Nick Price who was on his way to being the number 1 player in the whole world later that year. And I sat next to a plane with Nick Price in coach when I was in 9th grade.
That's amazing.
And I remember it because I had 7 Golf Digest magazines in my lap. I mean, I was a huge golf nerd, even in 9th grade. Yeah. And I look up and the guy that's literally on one of the covers for just winning the Open, he's there. If I recall, that was the episode or the cover where he won.
That's amazing.
And it was super cool to meet Nick Price. Yeah. This is so many years ago. So that was just being around people. And one thing I loved about him is he was super down to earth and super cool. Mm-hmm. He wasn't pretentious and snobby like some of the elites I've been around. And he was pretty cool.
And what I've noticed in music and celebrity and all of that is at the very beginning, on the beginning of somebody's rise, they're very humble, very present, very curious. When there's this middle part where there's a lot of like scarcity mentality, am I going to make it? Am I not? Like I'm almost like a B-list person. There's a lot of the things that you hear about in celebrity of the crazy attitudes and, this standoffishness. Like we had a tour 15 years ago with, somebody who was becoming like a YouTube sensation. And so he could fill the room of, 500 people and we were the opener for him. But he was like very standoffish and not a kind person to us. And I was like, we're not anything yet, you or us. Like, that's a weird way to interact with somebody. And then I would meet, these global superstars who are just as kind and curious and intentional and present as they could be. And so I think this is funny bell curve at the beginning, very humble, very curious. In the middle, when you're kind of a B-lister, there can be some of this. And then if you ever cross over that into a true superstardom, most of the people that I've come across are incredibly nice and kind and present.
I've also found that. I wonder what your relationship is with that, because you're well known as Curiosity Coach. I remember when we got connected, I looked you up and went down the rabbit hole. And I was just, first of all, I was a huge fan instantly because of the idea of curiosity coaching, right? So I noticed that you're involved in a number of places and pretty well known, very well known in the niches that you're in. But how do you deal with that as someone who is, I'd say, pretty famous in your own niches?
The very flattering picture that I think you're painting there. I think none of it interests me. And so,
Yeah.
one, I don't really think that it's true. Like, fame or notoriety, it's a construct. And so, I don't know that anybody would know me on the street or maybe even in my niches. But even if that were true, it's not interesting. And I've been having this conversation a lot lately about. I think most of life is dictated by the questions you think are interesting. And so, if you go, oh, is fame attractive or interesting? I don't think it's an interesting question. And so I wouldn't even ask it. What I think is more interesting is like, hey, are the people that you're encountering interesting and curious and open and growing and fascinating to you in new and different ways? And I think for me, what I love about the work that I get to do is it's constantly bringing me around new people that I would have never had contact with before who are doing really interesting things. Like a few weeks ago, I was on a plane and my wife laughs all the time about this because she's like, Carl, when people get on planes, they don't want to talk. And I jokingly tell her, I was like, I think that's your experience because you don't want to talk. You're a busy mom, young kids, you've got a whole life and all this stuff. So when you get the rare opportunity to get on a plane and have somebody serve you and it's a quiet 3 hours with your favorite book or a show, that's you time. So it makes complete sense that you don't want to talk. But I was like, I think it's all about like if my AirPods are in or their AirPods are in, it's like, I understand that that's the universal symbol for, hey, I'm busy, even if we're sitting next to each other. But I was sitting next to somebody 2 weeks ago on a flight back from a client visit, and their AirPods were out and mine were out. And so a conversation naturally started. This person happens to be the CTO of a 200,000 person company. And we had a fascinating hour and a half conversation
Wow.
about people problems, which is like my favorite thing. Because I tell people the problem isn't people, the problem is process. And so some part of the process is broken. And so if we can fix it, it will either help people find their new next thing because the process is encouraging them that this isn't the place for them, or the process becomes so clear and helpful that people grow and mature and they find their forever place in the culture that you're creating. And so I think the interesting question is the person in front of you worth being present and still and attentive to? And I think the beauty of the work that I do is 99 out of 100 times that is the answer to that is yes.
And the answer is yes, because you're able to craft a question that can bring out that brilliance or that genius or that part of them, rather than ask a lame question, which might make them be boring.
Sure.
If it's a boring question.
Yeah. No, that's very, very true. Yeah, you want to set people up for success. And so part of this is just going, when's the last time somebody asked me a great question? When's the last time I asked somebody a great question that sparked a fantastic conversation? And if the answer to that is, I don't remember, I would suggest, well, try some new questions.
Yes. Is part of your process coming up with some new interesting questions to ask people? Or do you have like a structured standard go-to set of questions you might start with on a plane, Carl?
Yeah, that's a fascinating thought. I do have a note in my phone that's just questions. Like anytime I hear a great one, anytime somebody asks me one, I'm like, hey, I want to remember this. And so I've got a note of them. So like if I pulled one out now, let's see, if we were to sit down, I was like, oh, I don't really know a touch point for me and Matt to get started on. Here's a list of great questions. So some of these you'd have to know somebody a little bit more. But one of the ones that I think is fun is, especially if you're traveling, somebody's going to have a different tomorrow than they're having today, because typically they're not on a plane again tomorrow. And so if tomorrow was the perfect day, what would that look like? And or, especially when you're with new people and they start to do, oh, where are you from? A great question is, hey, what's one thing about where you're from that has particular significance to you that you would love other people to know about? Whether it's your favorite ice cream shop or a food thing, or, oh, I went to this great school, or what is significant about a place that means something to you?
Awesome.
And again, you have to massage these based on we've known each other 30 seconds, or we've known each other a couple days, or we've known each other for 30 years. One of my favorite things is really discovering questions you can ask people that you've known for a long time, because now you're making assumptions that I know everything about this. I think a lot about this with my wife, and I know you talk about yours as well. It's like, we've been together now 18 years. I find her more interesting and fascinating today than I did 6 months ago or 18 years ago.
Well, what might be a couple questions that those of us who have been married for a decade or more might try to to utilize to help reconnect or explore our relationships better?
Yeah. So this is an excellent question that I get fairly often. I have to always give it this preface. Questions are helpful and dangerous. So the way in which you ask the question and the space in which you have the conversation is as important, if not more important, than the question itself. So the way that you ask the question and the space that you have the conversation is as important, if not more important, than the question you ask itself. And what I mean by this, it's the old heavy machinery idea. I ran a forklift as one of my first jobs like out of college or out of high school to put myself through college. And I remember they would run you through this 3-hour training video of do not operate this forklift under the influence of drugs, narcotics, lack of sleep. Like you can kill somebody. And so I'll jokingly say in my coaching with executives when they're talking to middle management or frontline workers, like, don't ask any of these questions under the influence of ego. It's the same as asking it under the influence of drugs or alcohol. You're trying to win. You're trying to get your way because your ego is driving the conversation. And what I haven't handed you now is something helpful. I've handed you a weapon. And I don't weaponize curiosity. And so the way that you ask the question has to be truly curious for the question to be valuable. And then also the other person has to feel a high sense of psychological safety. Like if I'm asking my wife this question, but it feels soft and warm for me, but she's going, hold on, you've asked this before and it typically leads to a fight. What she might feel is, oh, I'm painting her into a corner or I'm trying to win an argument by this is a setup. And so if she doesn't feel psychologically safe, where I go, hey, I'm not trying to fix anything. I'm not trying to win anything. I genuinely would love to know what's your take on this. Could I ask you this question? Is this a good time for this question? You're giving a lot of permission for the other person to say, I want to be in this conversation, but it's right question, wrong time. Let's find a different time. So as long as those two first things are good, that you're delivering the question in the right way at the right time, then some questions that I would ask inside deep, long relationships is, currently, what's one thing you keep on telling me that you think I still don't regard as important? What's the thing you keep on trying to communicate that you don't feel like I'm responding with enough urgency or importance to value it to the degree that you do? And then the other one is there a way that I could show up in the next 7 days that would speak to you in a new way? Is there a way that I could show up in the next 7 days that would speak to you in a new way? So, if you've been with somebody for a long time, we have take out the trash or dishes or finances or kids conversations. And so there's a lot of maintenance. There's a lot of fixing it. But this conversation really goes into like the EQ, the emotional intelligence portion. Like, how could I show up in a way that would really speak to you? And part of the way, if people are like, well, that's still too soft and fuzzy, I need a numerical value and a deadline. In the next 7 days, if you could set the percentages on this, I would love for you to tell me what you'd love me to do more. Feel things or fix things? So, and what's the percentage? Oh, I'd like you to be 90% feel it and 10% fix it. And a lot of times we'll see this over stereotypical gender roles. Guys are coming in going, I'm here to fix things. And so that's where they're giving 90% of the energy. And their partner might be saying, I really just wanted to have a conversation and you're interrupting me to go and say, oh, well, if we just did this or if we do this. They were asking for you to feel it 90% of the time. And all you were able to give was 10% of feeling, because you were giving 90% energy to fixing. And so the idea behind this is you have to feel it before you can fix it. And then you have to know what the percentages of those things are that speak to the other person. Because, I've known just as many women who are like, hey, we've talked enough now, but I also feel like maybe you're abdicating as the other person in this relationship. And you're so worn out by the problem and all the feeling, you have no energy now to fix it. And so it's about having this conversation about, hey, are we in the middle of this feel it, fix it? So it's 50-50 and we're moving towards fix it? Or no, I'm at 10% feel it now. I feel like we've had the conversation long enough. I would love for us to now actively start getting curious about what solutions could fix this problem.
Wow. Fantastic questions. Thank you, Carl.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
Those are great.
You're so welcome.
Those are great. We have time for one more question. I'd love to ask, is there a question you'd like to answer that I haven't asked uh, before we move to wrap up and share all your websites and move to the
Yeah.
final
Yeah.
final thought?
Yeah, I think for anybody in a leadership position, again, whether personally or professionally, the question that I hope more people would be asking of me when we're together or of themselves is, what is the next great question that could change things in my life? So the thesis of our work at Curiosity Coach is one great question can change everything. And I feel like for most people, because they are in this kind of scarcity protective space that we're neurologically wired for, we're wired to survive. And so our base evolution in our brain is going fight, flight, or freeze all the time. And answers help us with that. How far is the bear from getting to me? Oh, the bear is 100 yards away. That is a simple answer that helps keep me safe. But what if there are no bears? And we keep on asking, how many bears are there? How close is the attack? Is the thing that's going to hurt, kill, or hurt, maim, or kill me?
Okay.
And typically, as humans, we're spending 90% of our brain power thinking about these sorts of questions, when about 99% of the time there are no bears. My brother's a neurologist, and so I get to cheat a lot. And so he has this idea, and it's actually even in his branded logo for his clinic. And it's a bear checking his watch. He's got a suit and tie, and he's checking his watch. And he says, your brain doesn't know the difference between a bear attack and a deadline. So whether we're in business and we go, Carl, I'm not thinking about bears, but you are thinking about deadlines and the ways that the client's going to leave, or the employee's going to leave, or the next quarter's revenue is not going to come in. Something is difficult that is pressing against you. And sometimes we're just looking for very simple, quick fixes because we're moving so fast. And I would tell you that anything good that has happened in your life has come from an elevated, better question. So if you have a great employee in your company, at one point you said, I wonder what it would be like if I hired them. And look how that turned out. You're married. At one point you looked at your wife and went, I wonder if she's single. I wonder if she'd go out with me. Changed your whole life. If you have kids, at some point you went, I wonder what it'd be like to be a dad. Okay, and it changed your world. And so for me, I want people to do these three things really in their life and in their businesses. It's the ABCs to me of life and business. The A is ask a better question. So ask a better question. You can even put that as ask a different question or ask a great question. B is because you're asking great questions, you will now naturally be able to build a better culture. So the A is ask a great question. B is build a better culture. And then C, naturally inside business and also inside our personal life, that creates more revenue. In business, the word would be revenue. In our personal life, it creates more momentum or more peace or more connectivity with other humans. And so to me, it's this foundational piece of the ABCs of just a well-spent life. If we can ask great questions, we can build a better culture, and then we can create more revenue or a better life, whatever that C is for you.
Wow, amazing! You've gifted us so much wisdom, and it's been so simple and easy to listen. I don't feel any negative way towards you or your intelligence or the way you're showing up. You've just been really easy to listen to and be present with, Carl. And we appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate the invite.
How can we find out more about you or connect with you or follow you on your websites or on social media?
Yeah, the easiest way is just go to getmorecurious.com. So we were very fortunate to see that URL still existed a couple of years ago. We're like, oh, well, that seems easy. So yeah, we're inspiring, hopefully inspiring people and humans to be more curious. And so we got getmorecurious.com. And then for business owners who are wanting to get in touch and get this sort of help, they can do that through that website. But also, if they're looking to do it at scale, we've recently, in the last 3 months, launched a digital tool called our Curiosity Training. And they can find that at curiosity.training. And we teach on 7 different tools, 7 different trainings: conflict resolution, expectation setting, purpose alignment, people development, leadership training, clear language, and ideation to implementation. And so they can subscribe to those individually, or they can get all 7 Curiosity trainings in one at that curiosity.training.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Carl.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
This has been fantastic. You brought us to the lightning round here to wrap things up. And I got a couple, 3 last questions for you.
Yeah.
And these are softball questions, by the way. These are not that creative. And they are questions that can lead us to curiosity when we apply in the right way. So I would ask you this. If you like to read, what might be 1 to 3 books that have really impacted you that you would recommend to our listeners today?
The most recent one would be Unreasonable Hospitality. This is from the chef. He ran the #1 restaurant in the world, and he talks about everybody else is doing really creative, innovative gastronomic things. And they said, we can keep on copying that, or we can become so unreasonably good at hospitality that people will never forget the way that we made them feel at our restaurant. And his name is Will Guidara. And so that's a great one, Unreasonable Hospitality. The other one that I almost always recommend is Essentialism. It's this idea that we are trying to prioritize lots of different things in our life, but the word priority used to be singular. There can really only be one priority, and then everything else has to serve that thing. And it's a really easy read. It's incredibly practical. That's by McEwen, is the guy who wrote that. And then the one that I think probably everybody on the planet has recommended 1,000 times. But if you ever feel stuck and like the burden or the obstacle's too big, Atomic Habits by James Clear is, my other first handout to people, just to go, hey, you're probably overcomplicating this. So start with 1% better. And here's the quickest way to do it is just read James Clear's book. And by the way, he's another guy. I was at a conference with him a few years ago, and as lovely as he is, talented and brilliant. So I always like reading authors where I'm like, oh, you're a really nice human as well. I love knowing that.
Fantastic. And I love that book as well. When I give keynote talks, I normally go to chapter 1, the very first story about Dave Brailsford, and tell that story about the aggregation of marginal gains. I'm a big fan of Atomic Habits, so I'm glad to bring that up. And thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Second question, let's go to music. I know that you played a little something for us a little bit earlier. I'm curious, what is your song or genre or type of music that really just inspires you, gets you lit up?
Yeah, so I'm a songwriter, is my talent, I guess, inside the music world. My brothers are far more talented vocally. There are literally every musician on the planet is probably more technically gifted than me, but I just love telling a great story. And so the lyricists to me that have meant the most would be people like Dave Matthews, also South African. So I've got a big soft spot there for him. I really enjoy Brandi Carlile. She's an incredible songwriter. And then I don't know what it is about the Irish. They just know how to tell and write a song. So there's an Irish songwriter called Damien Rice, who's fantastic. Another Irishman, obviously, is Bono. And so enjoy U2. And then non-Irish, but still a great storytellers would be David Gray. So those would be some of my favorite. And then the American John Mayer, who also lovely human, gets a lot of bad press, but I've actually found the opposite to be true.
Fantastic. Last question. You're on the Eternal Optimist podcast. And when I say eternal optimist, what might that mean to you, Carl?
Eternal optimism for me, especially as a foreigner, means this idea that there's always light in any situation. I grew up in a country in South Africa that went through really, really difficult times. And, my friends and family back home are still holding on to this idea that hope still exists even in the midst of darkness. And as we look out at the country in a political election year, and as the world, whether things are happening in the Middle East or in Ukraine and Russia, it is very easy for us to go, oh, all is lost. But there's this beautiful idea that, one spark of light will always eliminate darkness. It can never overwhelm it entirely. And so in the physical universe, it's telling us that optimism is the more powerful force. Light is the more powerful force. And so this beautiful idea also coming into an Olympic year of going, hey, this torch will literally pass its way around the world, this flame that we keep lit and going. There's a greater purpose and ability and connectivity in humanity than we could imagine once we are committed to that thing. And so that, to me, is probably the way that I would view eternal optimist.